I wanted to make a video about the newest version of Mazda's i-ACTIV all-wheel drive. This is the version that's used in the Mazda 3, the CX-30, and the CX-50. The CX-9, the CX-5 use a version of this, but there are some key differences, and then when I get to those parts that are different, I will explain those differences there. So let's start with the major components. You have an engine and the transmission. Inside that transmission, you have a differential. These blue parts that I've colored are the front axles. They spline into the differential inside the transmission. They go through, on the passenger side, goes through the transfer case, goes to the wheel. It's important to note this axle does not actually do anything inside the transfer case except pass through a sleeve that's hooked to the ring gear. That ring gear hooks to a pinion gear, which is hooked to the rear drive shaft, which goes back to the rear coupling. So for the bulk of the rear components, you have your coupling and your rear differential. The coupling bolts right to the rear diff, the drive shaft bolts to the outside of the coupling. The coupling turns this section of clutches here. They're always turning. This drive shaft always turns whenever power is rotating the front differential case because of how it's hooked here. So your drive shaft is always spinning whenever you've got power going to your wheels and back. You've got this pinion right here that goes into the ring gear on the differential that also has a set of clutches splined to this shaft. What happens is this electromagnetic clutch that's right here is actuated by a solenoid commanded by the computer about how much power it wants to transmit to the rear. How it does that is there's a ball and ramp inside here that as this coil is energized, it pulls up against that and it affects a clutch grab mount in this system right here. Let's talk about what makes this system a little unique. So in most systems like this, and in the one that the CX-5 and the CX-9 use, you've got a final drive ratio that comes out to whatever the designer has set up. You then have a transfer case gear ratio, and then you have a rear differential gear ratio. In most all-wheel drive systems that are a front-wheel drive style setup, like these cars, this gear ratio here and this gear ratio here are inverses of each other. This makes it so there's no binding, works smooth, works how they should work. So in a normal four-wheel drive, if you know how one of those systems works, like say you're in a truck, if you have a 358 gear ratio in the rear, your front differential has to match, because once you go into four-wheel drive, if they don't, they start tearing each other up, you will break things. In an all-wheel drive system that's based like this, and this is true for all of them on the market, the final reduction happens here. And so the gear ratio here to here doesn't matter what it is. So you can see it's a 2533 versus a 358. That's not a problem because this is just transferring power to this. That doesn't have anything to do with your front wheels. Where this system gets unique is the fact that the gear ratio here in the transfer case and the gear ratio in the rear differential are different. There's a 1.1% speed difference between the two. So what that's doing, to make the math easy, let's say you've got your wheels turn 1,000 RPM up front, it's going to be overdriving the rears to be turning, it's a 1.1% difference in this case, so they're going to be turning 1,011 RPM. So when this vehicle's on the ground, that doesn't really happen because the wheels like to be going the same speed. So what happens is you have to think of this coupling more as a brake instead of a driving clutch. So that brings us to torque distribution subject. So a lot of OEMs like to talk about you've got a 60-40, 50-50, 30-70, whatever. That doesn't really exist in the real world because it's constantly going to be varying by the amount of grip and load and weight that each wheel has on the vehicle. So Mazda doesn't like to quote torque split because it changes often. But how it works is, let's say you're driving down the road, the car is wanting more power to the rear than it does the front, or it wants to pull some power out of the front to go to the rear, not necessarily more, but to equalize the power. How it does that is if you're thinking about this clutch as a brake, as it squeezes those clutch plates together, with that speed difference, it's going to be trying to equalize both front and rear tire speeds. Because of how torque and power works, it will pull power from the front to the rear in an attempt to equalize it, because it's braking the front wheels versus the rear. It doesn't slow the car down. It's just trying to get the vehicle to pull more power to the rear. And the coupling itself is pretty robust. JTech supplies them to Mazda. They've been used by a lot of OEMs for 15 to 20 years. They don't have a very high failure rate. The discs inside them are a really hard alloy. The fluid is a silver. So it's like an ATF. The viscosity is a little different. But they have a diamond-like coating on the clutch plates. So their torque distribution is very quick, very accurate, and the wear that they get is not terrible. Seeing a service life over 100,000 miles is not uncommon. Very robust, and again, they're just super accurate on torque delivery because it's electronically controlled like that. So the next couple things I'm going to show are some real-world examples of just driving around in my car under various conditions and what that equates to and how active the all-wheel drive is. My big reason for making this video is there's been a lot of debate about whether this is a full-time all-wheel drive system, if it's a slip and grip, whatever anybody likes to call them. I'll show you in the videos that it is a full-time system, and it is almost always sending an amount of power to the rear. All of these videos were in the dry, there's no wet, so this would be how the vehicle would respond to normal conditions. Alright, we've got the all-wheel drive solenoid, the temperature of the coupling itself, and the rear diff. Put it in reverse, it immediately starts locking the clutch up a little bit. And then depending on throttle input, kind of shuffles it around a little bit. Okay, again, we're in drive, just giving it a little bit. Moving some around, just very low throttle input. Let's get after it a little bit. Then after that, just a normal little acceleration. Nothing major. Going about 20 miles an hour. And then just slide re-acceleration. We got more power going to the rear. So right now, I'm going 30 miles an hour, just coasting down the road. As you can see, still power being transmitted to the rear. With almost no throttle input. Okay, this is just steady speed driving. I'm going right around 70 miles an hour. As you can see, the coupling's actually fairly active at highway speeds when I'm just cruising. So right now we're 75, and we still have got some coupling lock. Okay, this is going around a pretty good corner at freeway speeds. Okay, entering a roundabout. This one will be a little different. So this is a screenshot of what happened in the roundabout. I put it in a graph form so we could watch it a little better. This is when we entered the right here, and it's gave you a little bit because you first started going in, it held it steady. This is when you punched the throttle the first time. I let off, hit it again, let off, hit it again, came out, then went after it. So what it's doing, and you can feel it when you're in the car, when you're going around, you can really feel the rear end start to push when you're going in a tight circle like that with a lot of throttle going on. Feels really good, pulls the car through it, keeps the understeer down. It still does understeer a little bit because of the type of car it is. It's not a sports car, not a race car, it's not any of that. It does still understeer, but you can feel the rear end start to rotate when it sends a lot of power to the back. Feels really good. So the differential itself through the whole thing maybe got up to 100 degrees. It was about 65 degrees outside, so not terrible at all. The coupling itself also did not get very hot. I've never had an excessive all-wheel drive warning come on like some people have. I also don't go out and do donuts in the snow, and that is super destructive on drivetrain components. Doesn't matter what car it is. That's very harmful. It's one of the reasons why Mazda shuts the power down when it does that, is because if you overheat this coupling, it'll toast itself, or as some people are finding, you're going to break the rear diff.